All right, it's recording to the cloud.
Awesome. Well, hello, Cloud. Hello, Mary, JC, Eduardo, and Alona, and Sarah. Hello there. I don't know how many of you tuned into the workshop last week, where we built a pretty simple HTML application. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so I have a little bit of context of what I'm talking about. That's not it. This is a desktop. Okay. All right, yeah, this website we have up on the screen, very simple website, is kind of what we built last week. It works though. It collects emails. It saves them to a database. It does all that cool stuff you want your websites to do. And if you are interested in kind of going through that course again, we recorded it. We made sure y'all could get permanent access to that to enjoy at whatever speed you find comfortable to yourself, and whatever speed you need to have you building websites. I think the only takeaway that I want people to get from that last workshop is that the only thing that's standing between you and that website that you want to put up is like an afternoon of work. But for today, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to maybe reduce the speed of the workshop, because I think last workshop I was going really quickly, just blowing through all of that good stuff. So I kind of wanted to open with if y'all have any questions that y'all may have gotten from last week. Maybe you watched the video, maybe you watched, or you were in the audience, and if anything that you kind of had questions around that wasn't really answered, I'd love to take a second to kind of just start a conversation and kind of make this a little bit more interactive. But shortly after that, what I do want to cover today is kind of the topic that y'all signed up for, which is styling your website with CSS. And we're kind of going to go over just a really high level overview of kind of what CSS is, and kind of how to utilize that to add layout, animations, transitions, colors, backgrounds, different fonts, all that kind of stuff that makes your website really interactive, really beautiful. But yeah, before we dive into that, does anybody have any questions? Or if you just want to say something, we're just here to have a nice nice conversation today. Does everybody know how to raise your hand on Zoom? I think you could just unmute yourself if you're interested.
Sorry, I missed this. Are we still going to do some CSS today?
Absolutely.
Oh, awesome.
That is absolutely what we're doing today. I kind of just wanted to, because this is like a bridge between the part one and the part two, I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions kind of left over from last session.
I'm trying to hang on for a little bit.
All right, well, feel free to at any point during this raise your hand on Zoom or say hello or hi, and I'll make sure to kind of stop whatever it is I'm doing so we can get a better idea of what we're doing here. But the project that I have open here in my code editor is the project that I worked on last session, right? It was that fictitious website that I built to gather interest in this fictitious little product that I came up with. And today what I wanted to do was kind of add some styling to this to make it, you know, a little bit more presentable, I wanted to go into some of the different, I don't know if I would call them frameworks, because they're not necessarily frameworks like you would think of a Bootstrap or other libraries that you would use to provide a lot of the CSS layout kind of stuff that we're going to be doing today. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to open up the app.css file that was created last Tuesday when I used Create React App to launch my app. Create React App went ahead and created this app.css file with a whole bunch of code that I'm not going to use. It's currently not even targeting my code. So what I also kind of, you know, this is where you might want to stop me if you're not super familiar, but you know, one of the really funky things that we're doing here in JavaScript is importing our CSS file in the root of our application, right? This is just the same way that we would import kind of any other JavaScript module, but you know, instead we're importing CSS, which is a little weird, which you know you wouldn't be able to do just out of the box. But under the hood, Create React App is using Webpack to compile all of our assets, whether that be an image, JavaScript file, HTML files, JSON files, all that kind of stuff. And you know, one of the cool things about Create React App is I don't necessarily have to think about like, how do I set up importing a CSS file from my JavaScript? I don't have to think about that. But you know, I would have to kind of think about like, is there a downside to importing my CSS in this way? And actually, if we look at our build actually just does kind of compile CSS for us. So that means something to you? It kind of means that, you know, we're kind of doing good stuff with CSS, where you're still going to be able to load your CSS on your HTML file or HTML page if, you know, if the user has JavaScript disabled, for example. But what I kind of want to do with my app.css, which is actually a really cool little first example, it shows us kind of how to create this like, class declaration, and then how to give that class declaration some styles. It also shows us this little media query here, and it gives us one of the different parameters that we could pass this media query to give like special styles when this condition of, you know, prefers reduced motion is true. This same kind of media query, let's say that, let's try something here. Let's say that I want the body of my application to have a background of red. Let's make it red. So if I load my application, or if I save that page, right, and I load my application, I'm going to see that my red background has been applied. But then let's say that on mobile devices, I want this same background to be blue. So I would say that media, and then I would have to say, I'm going to actually, give me 1 second.
Hey there. Could you please increase the font size?
Oh, absolutely. My bad.
Thank you.
No problem.
Looks good.
Did I want that? Yes, give me 1 second. Media screen. Yeah. I could do something like back at that line. I'm gonna say media, only screen, and when the max width of the page, let's say it's 600 pixels, whatever that means to the page, I want my body to be a background of blue. Let's load our page, see if that happens. So we're not going to see that change, right? But if I shrink my page to be less than 600 pixels, you see how that background changed? So that right there is kind of like the essence of what we call responsive design or responsive CSS. It's basically understanding that, you know, you need different rules for different sizes. But I think I am myself jumping a little bit ahead of myself here with just kind of talking about responsive design first, without even talking about, like, I just wrote 600 px. What's a px? You know, what's a screen? What's any of these things? So the first thing that I kind of want you to think about when we're talking in CSS terms, right, is that everything, and again, let's go back even further, right? Let's talk about the language that puts all of this content in our page, right? The HTML that we wrote last time here, right? So all of this content that's currently represented in our page, right? So, you know, let's think that the HTML is the structure of our page, right? It's you know, what are the headers of our pages? Where is the content of our page? What kind of content is it? Are there interactive elements in your page, like this input, like this button? Yes, so we've declared all of that in our HTML, but now what we'd want to do is declare how all of that content looks and is presented on the page, right? And, you know, we could do that right into the HTML. The HTML spec, most elements, will have a property called style. And in React, if you're writing a style object, there's some really cool stuff going on in the background where, like, if let's say I use a certain CSS rule that Chrome or Safari handles well, but, you know, if I want the same behavior on Firefox, I have to write that rule with a different name. These are called, you know, rule prefixes. So you could have something like appearance equals none, but then you could have something that's like WebKit appearance also equals none. And a lot of the time when we're writing our styles directly into the DOM here, well, React and the Webpack library that's actually running all of this is going to pick up all of these styles, and it's actually going to prefix them for us automatically. So we're going to get the most consistent application of our styles everywhere, which is awesome. So I don't necessarily want to write my styles that way. There's, you know, a little bit of a history lesson. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that now. When I started designing websites in like 2009, it was like a sin to write an inline style. That's what I just wrote here. Like if I did style and then display equals block, that would be an inline style. But just like I wrote those. Just like I wrote those rules in that CSS file, I could write these rules in this inline style. And if I go back to my page, I could see that those styles are also applied, which is awesome. But there are a lot of disadvantages to writing inline styles. For example, one of really awesome things that we could do with CSS is handle interactivity. And what that means is that, you know, I want this button, let's say I want this button to be black when I hover over it or something like that. Well, I can't necessarily give this input an inline style that will handle how this input should look when the user hovers over a button, right? And we can kind of imagine what, you know, hovering over these buttons or in a different page, right? If I hovered over a button, this would look a little different. So what I can do is I can actually just target this input, right? I'm going to go to my CSS, I'm going to delete all of this content I'm not using yet. And I'm going to say that, all right, there is a form on my page, and inside that form, there's an input. And actually, there are multiple inputs in that form, but I'm just still going to go through it this way and like teach you the better way to do this in a second. Red. But that same input, form input, whenever it's hovered, right, I want that background to be yellow. I'm going to save that. Now you can see that both of our inputs are actually yellow, which was not my intention, right? I actually just wanted it. I just wanted the button to be yellow. So I could actually further target that button. So I could say that input, but the type has to be a submit. And then I have to do that same thing to this rule down here. And now I am only targeting my button, right? And whenever I hover over my button, it's getting this yellow rule that I wanted it to get, which is awesome. And what that kind of teaches us is about these pseudo classes that exist in all of our elements. Like this input element has one, this label element surely has one, the form, the section, the p tags, all of these elements have these pseudo classes. And you can read about all of them, or you could, let's say I want to know what the pseudo classes are for even this input. I'm gonna right click it. I'm gonna click on view page source. Nope, not gonna click on that. I'm gonna click on inspect. It might be different on your browser. But yeah, this brings up my development tools, which will actually let me do a lot of really cool, powerful things. But one of the things that I'm currently interested in is, like, let's say that I'm working on just the styles for how this button will look when it's hovered. Maybe I wanted to have a whole different style. Well, I could actually, in my development tools, I'll just click on that input, and under styles, which get highlighted here, I can see all of the different styles that are getting passed to this element. I could go on to this little HOV toggle element state thing. And when I click on that, I could actually see the different pseudo elements that my component has. And I could click on hover here to see what styles get passed to my button when it's hovered, which is this yellow thing. So like, let me make the color of this red to make it more drastic. And again, none of these are pretty styles, but I kind of just want to talk about what we're going to be doing here. And now if I just toggle over here, I could really quickly see, all right, what are the different styles that we're going to be getting on a different states, right? So back in our CSS, I actually, don't want to write my targets this way, because, well, the way that I write CSS, right, I want my CSS to be highly specific to the component itself, right? And because of the way that I've written this component, well, if my input type submit button happens to be outside of this form or somewhere else in relation to this form, well, my CSS will no longer work, because it's actively saying that these styles, this background yellow, will only apply to an input type submit that is hovered inside of a form, right? So just to kind of test that assumption real quick, I am going to do just that. I'm going to take this input type submit, and just for the testing purposes, I pasted it outside. I pasted it outside of this form, and you can see that I'm no longer, my button is no longer where it was, right? And I'm no longer getting those styles, because again, my input is no longer inside this form, which I was using, right? So instead of using these the selectors, which are basically the element itself, the type of element, which is kind of not as unique as I'd want it to be. What instead I could do is give my input a class name, right? So for example, I'm going to, and again, this is React. If we were writing HTML, we would just say class equals, I'm going to call this submit button. But because we're writing React, this is actually going to require a class name. React just makes us do this to keep HTML and React properties kind of working together well. But now what I can do with this class name that I've defined in the structure of my page is I'm going to change both of these declarations to use that class name of submit button. And notice that I used a period before the class name that I'm trying to target. That is the way that we denote that this is a class. If we were targeting an ID, which I don't recommend we do in CSS, we would be using, instead of a dot, a hashtag, $. Yeah, I'll pick a name for that. But now, regardless of where my button is, as long as I have and it doesn't matter if it's a button either, right? I could just have a literal button element with a class name of submit button. If I save that, my other button is going to get those same styles, right? I could even have a title. And here I could see that title that I just created, that H1, that has that class name of submit button, so that it has a background of red. And when I hover it, it has a background of yellow. And this is something that's really powerful in CSS, because I could basically just define, this is what my submit button styles look like, right? And any element, regardless of where it is, regardless of what it's doing, will get these styles. So you don't have to rewrite your CSS if you want to have the same button style somewhere else. So let me kind of get rid of all of this. It's not very pretty CSS, it's just debug CSS. Get rid of these elements that don't make too much sense. Put that input back where it belongs. All right. So now that I've kind of covered, how I'm going to target the different elements inside my page, how I'm going to give those elements different rules. What I want to do now is I kind of want to show you the different responsibilities of your style, right? And those responsibilities largely fall in choosing a layout for your application. So where are these elements kind of physically located on your page? I'm going to cover how those elements look in terms of color. I'm also going to talk a little bit about each element's box model. And the box model being like literally one of the most important properties of an element in CSS. I am going to synthesize that very important property into telling you that everything in your web page, everything that you are looking at is a box. That's how your browser understands it. It understands it as a box that that has a width and a height. It has a couple other properties, namely it has a margin or how that element interacts with other elements on the page. it has a, and let me actually kind of start by kind of showing that off. So I'm going to use this special selector. It's the star selector in CSS, and it's basically every element needs to get this style, every element you find on the page. I don't recommend you use it very often unless you really know what you're doing, but for right now, I want every single element on this page to get a border width of 1 pixel, a border color of red, and a border style of solid. Now you can see that every single element on my page got that ugly red border. But what I kind of want to do right now is give every single element a background of light yellow, which doesn't help too much, but that is fine. And one of the other things that we just learned is that every box in your page, every box model also has a border. Something that I like to think about, and it's kind of presented here too, is that every single element on your page, when you inspect it, so let me inspect this header. When you inspect it, and when you go on styles here, depending on your browser, you should probably have what styles are getting applied. You scroll all the way to the bottom, and you could see very quickly what that element's box model is, right? And even though I, nowhere in my code, have said that, hey, by the way, give me 1 second. Give me just 1 second. And just the same way that I kind of lost my place. I haven't defined this margin anywhere, right? And it's actually just coming from the default values that every browser kind of includes for their elements, right? And the browser, this being Chrome, has decided that, by the way, all right, if you're not going to give H1s any specific margins, well, a title should have space around it. So, you know, the margin is going to have this default margin block start 0.6. Is that the actual thing? Yeah, that is the actual thing that's getting applied. And here we see a different unit. We've been using pixel so far, and a pixel just relating to, I don't even know if I want to go into the definition of this, because it used to be, it's, you know, a literal like pixel on your screen, but I'm looking at a 4K monitor where 1 pixel on a 4K monitor doesn't actually translate to 1 pixel on the screen. But there are some really cool stuff happening in your browser where it's kind of translating that to what it means to the scale of the UI. But aside from pixel, there are a variety of other elements. And one of the elements that I want to show, one of those units I want to show you is the rem. And I'm currently defining that the default font size of my root, so like the very top level of my application, is going to be 16, so that I can say that my H1 is going to have a font size of 2 rem. And can't really see it change. I'm going to make it 4. Make it huge. Too big. That's nice. All right. So now you can see that I made this title a little bit bigger. Let me delete this rule. Delete this rule to make that more apparent. Okay. And when I use this rem unit, what's actually happening here is I am telling to this H1 component that, hey, your font size is going to be 3. It's going to be 3 times the unit of size that you're using in your parent parent element, right? In this case, I'm just saying that any any children H1 in our application are going to be 3 times 16. So if I wanted, let's say that my paragraphs, I actually want them to be like 14, maybe even 12, then what I'd have to do is this really interesting multiplication experiment where I am basically finding, all right, I need a percentage of 16. So I think 0.75 for 12. Yes, it is. So basically, if I want to get this font size of 12 on my paragraphs, I would say font size is equal to 0.75 rems. And now, if I look at the size in these paragraphs right here, when I save my file, they'll have just changed. Now, I could just, hard code and say that I want my font size to be 12 pixels all the time, and that's fine, right? But the benefit of using this rem unit is that, let's say that, like, all right, Google just said that in order to have a good user experience, the root size of your application should be 20 pixels instead of 16, or whatever it is that they're saying now. So, did somebody have a question? Okay. So, if that happened and Google said that, then I could just go to my root where I defined kind of the default base font size, and I could just change this to 20. And immediately, all of the elements that are using this rem unit will automatically update. But because my paragraph is still using that hard-coded 12 pixels, it's actually not updating. So if I instead, well, let's delete this and uncomment that, save this, and let me show you that same transition. Now, I hope you could notice, but yeah, all of our elements now are, at least all of our P elements and our H1s are appropriately scaled to whatever it is we want them on the root. But I made those ugly red borders for something. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of edit. Let's say I want to edit this. Well, first off, I want to remove the margin from everything, just to reset my margins from everything. Right? I'm seeing some thick borders, and this is just because there are multiple elements here. I know that there is a special way to make a rule. So like if I did something like star specifically inside something, I could do border color green, and then I could continue this pretty much forever to find how many layers deep this onion goes. See, there is one big red border, one green border here, and then blue borders. And if I wanted to continue going, there's a blue border here. Turns out there's a whole ton of more stuff here. But what I do want to show you is, now I kind of want to show you the other box model rules, right? I could say, and I don't want everything right now. So why don't we start off by giving our header a specific kind of rule. So my header here is this React component that I created, and I don't necessarily want to edit this in place. So what I will have to do is go to my files and find wherever I declared that header component. And the actual HTML for this header component, I want to change this to class name navigation. So I'm going to go back to my CSS. Now that I've created that navigation, I could target it directly. And one of the other rules that I could have for my box model is margin. So I could say that my margin, and you could see, and this is because I'm using VS Code, and I kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit. There are a lot of CSS rules. There are rules for margin, rules for padding, rules for positioning, rules for background colors, border radius. I'm just kind of naming the rules that I use most often, but there are many, many rules to CSS. Let me see if I can get a list to send y'all. MDN CSS rules. I don't know. This doesn't necessarily give me the actual rule. Yeah, I'll make sure y'all get a list of all of the possible rules. But right now, I just want to say that my navigation, let's just give that a background of green just to know what we're talking about. Oh, which won't get, I'm going to delete this bad rule. And now I'm going to say that my navigation is actually going to have a height of 30 VH. VH being a whole different type of unit. And what this unit, there's two of them, right? There is height and there is one for width. And let's say that for width, I want it to be 100 VW. And what VH and VW stand for is it's a unit that's relative to either the viewport height or the viewport width of the page. So when I'm saying, hey, I want my navigation element to have a background of green and then a height of 30 VH, what I'm basically saying is I need this height, or the height for this navigation to be 30% of the height of the screen that they're viewing this. So if I go over here to my page and I mess with the window height, you can see that the height of that navigation is also kind of shrinking with it, which is super cool for a lot of other kind of responsive elements. And it also shows you that the height and the width are a part of my box model, right? This navigation, which has its own box, I am saying that the box of this navigation needs to have this specific height, this specific width. Now, the box can interact with elements inside of it, right? So I could say that for this navigation, the padding of it is going to be 24 pixels. And now, any elements that are put inside of this navigation element, like this header here, is going to get a padding of 24 pixels around each of its sides. So, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want only the bottom of this box needs to have that 24 pixel bottom. And now I can edit my rule. So now this is my navigation box still. Now there's only 24 pixels coming up from the bottom of it. So there's also a lot of different ways to just use the same padding rule. So if I wanted to say, I want a 24 pixel vertical padding, and I want a double that, a 48 pixel horizontal padding, I could say, I could use the padding rule this way. Why am I? Oh, no. I could use the padding rule this way, where I've denoted these two units, 24 pixels, 48 pixels. When I save that, I could see that the horizontal padding, so the left and the right, is getting that 48. And then the bottom and the top, vertical padding, is getting that 24, smaller than 48. And this is essentially equivalent to saying padding top 24, padding bottom 24, padding left 48, padding right 48. Now, if I wanted to go one step further and say that it doesn't need any bottom padding, I could then say, all right, it needs 24 vertical, 48 horizontal, but then 0 padding in the bottom. I could also do that. And if I wanted to go one step further and say that actually the left needs a 12 pixel padding, I could also define this 4th unit. And that's just because the way that the CSS rule works is that the first element that you pass is actually the top value. So this is equivalent to padding top. So padding top 24 pixels, then padding right 48 pixels. So this being the right element. And before, when we only had the top and the top and the right, then the CSS engine just knows, oh, well, if you didn't pass any explicit values to your left and bottom, then you just want to repeat padding top to padding bottom and padding right to padding left. But because that isn't the case here, I actually, after going to padding right, the 0, I'm defining it. This is saying padding bottom is 0. And then the last one, padding left, which is 12. Now, this same kind of thing applies to margin. Because again, the margin being one of these box model rules, I could say this to use the same exact declaration. And now this navigation that I've created has a margin, a top margin of 24 pixels, a right margin of 48, a bottom margin of nothing, and a left margin of 12 pixels. And I can tell that this is kind of pushing against outside of my box model, right? Because this background, it's making the pushing against its parent, right? Oh, that might be a little hard to conceptualize right now. But enough of this ugly looking stuff. I get rid of all these borders. Close all borders. And I'm going to leave this navigation. Now I want my body to have a background that's really dark, just really dramatic. Now we can't see anything on our page, which is not necessarily what I want. So even if I'm targeting the body, CSS has something that's super cool or super uncool, depending on who you ask, and that is inheritance. So I gave my body, the body of this page, a color of white. And this being a hex for white, hex being, I don't know, I can't define hex color. I'm just gonna look up the Wikipedia entry, which doesn't even come up when you Google hex color wiki. It's basically just how we define web colors. And really it's every, I don't even know how it goes. The first 2 characters are its red value. The second 2 characters are its green, and the third are its blue. But we start counting from F being the highest value down, you know, like EFG, or sorry, up to F for higher. But once we get to A, we start at 0, which is why black would be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And the reason that we can use, that I could use 3 zeros instead of 6 zeros, and then 3 Fs instead of 6, is because if I want the same value for both of my red, green, and blue colors, then I could just pass the first one and it'll repeat that for me. But again, what I wanted to show you was that inheritance aspect of CSS, where, because I said that, hey, the body of my page has this color of white, then any element inside that body, which is basically all of the elements inside our page, are going, unless they have a defined color for themselves, they're just going to say, well, my color is just going to inherit whatever is above it, right? So if I wanted to say, I don't know, anything inside of a section is actually going to have a color of red, then because these elements here are inside this section, they are inheriting their color from their parent section that has a color red. Now, if I didn't want that, right? Like maybe I want all of the elements inside this section to be red, to be a color of red, but I actually want, I don't know, any H2 inside of a section to be blue. I could give this specific element a declared color, and it would ignore whatever it was inheriting, because now it has a color, and like, all right, all you other elements inside this section can be red, but I've been given a color, my color is blue, I'm gonna be blue. I don't know why these elements have polymorphized in my head, but I'll fine for now. So some of this I want to keep, right? I do actually want the body of my background to be this dramatic black. And now I kind of want to style this navigation that actually exists between both of our pages. And in order to do that, I'm going to use that navigation class I declared earlier. And I want my navigation to have, I don't know, a padding. I actually don't want to have, yeah, I do want to have a padding. Padding of, let's say, 40. And I want this title to actually be centered on my page. So one of the things that I could do here is, all right, I could say that, well, there's an H1 inside of this navigation, and I want that H1 to get a text align center. And that works because what's happening here, and let me inspect this element just so I can see how its box model is behaving. Inspect. I can see that inside this header, and this green color here when I hover over header, just denotes that that's the padding that this navigation component is getting. Well, this H1, I could actually see that it's taking up the entire width that it can take. So I could just say text align center, just like I could say text align right or left, but I want it to be centered to get this element centered. Now, I'm not going to do this because, again, I think anytime that you're using these kind of naked selectors, so like you're just calling the element itself, I think my CSS loses its reusability, which I really, really don't like. I want my CSS to be as reusable as possible. Because, you know, what if I, instead of having this H1, I now just have like an A tag or something. An A tag, which is a link. Now I lost all my styles. I'm still getting that padding because my navigation, its parent component, is executing that padding, but my A tag is no longer centered. So one of the things that I kind of like doing lately is how do I get that layout that I want without even touching its children? And what I'm going to use for that is one of these new display values called flex. Actually, I need to change this back. So I've used display flex, but nothing has happened. And what display flex allows me to do is it unlocks a whole slew of flex based layout rules that I'm not going to cover in too much depth, but CSS tricks flex good. Any single time I've had to code in Flexbox, I basically have this page right alongside my code editor, which is like the absolute best documentation page on all of the different flex rules. But basically what you should think about is that flex lets me define how content will be laid out inside of a block, right? And it lets me do really powerful things that I wasn't able to do with CSS before. You could kind of see that here in justify content, where I could basically say that all of the content should either be grouped at the beginning of this container or at the end or in the center. The space they should have space in between or around them. You could actually denote for specific elements where they should be inside of a container. You could also align things really well. And I like the joke that, you know, flex, or it used to be that, like, let's say that instead of this padding, which just kind of helps me center my content, I'm just going to give my navigation a height of 400 pixels. Now, that was way too big because I'm super zoomed in. Now we can kind of see that my title is still there, but now the header just has this huge height, and none of the content, or none of my items are centered within it. So what I can actually, and it used to be that if you wanted me to center this before using Flexbox, I would have to use really funky things, like maybe say that the children inside of it needed to have a margin of automatic on both sides, but it also needed to match the height somehow. Lots of mess. But instead of all that mess, what I could basically just say now, because I have a display of flex, is I could say that I want you to justify the content inside of this container to the center, and I want you to align its items also to the center. And boom. Regardless of the height that gets passed to this header, and let's try that out with one of those super cool responsive units. So let's say that the height of this navigation is going to be 20% of the height of our viewport. And now, doesn't matter what height our element is getting, is our element, which is our title, is always staying centered, which is exactly what I want. So I've just showed you a little bit of display flex just inside this container, but now let's actually make this content, this our titular content, let's make it make a little bit more sense, right? It's currently just taking up this whole entire side. And actually, you know, I've seen a lot of web pages and they do this really cool, like, 2-column thing where there's like a photo on one end, like here, and then there's text on the other end. So I actually want to do that. And then, well, first I need to steal a picture from Oculus. I think I misspelled that too. Great. Yeah, I'm gonna just yank this picture real quick, which I don't necessarily recommend you do on your websites, because if you're making any money off of whatever it is you're yanking, they'll come after you and say, hey, don't use our photos, with a real nice letter from a lawyer. So, you know, make sure that you're grabbing pictures from places where you're allowed to grab pictures. The first thing that I need to do is kind of bring that content that I have somewhere in my page. So I'm just going to drop it into this src folder that I have here. Now I'm going to press enter to be able to rename it. So I'm going to rename it to headset.jpg. And now in my application where I'm defining this content, I could import that image. And again, I can import this .jpg file that isn't a JavaScript file because Webpack and Create React App is doing a lot of stuff under the hood to make sure that it's importing all of my content. So headset image from, what did I name it? Headset, headset.jpg, headset.jpg. Did that wrong. And now what I can do is, well, I kind of want to leave my form section alone, right? I don't want to like mess with this content too much. This is really laid out well enough. So I'm actually going to open a new section. And I want to put my form inside this section. And then outside of this form, but still inside of my section, I want to have that image. And I'm just going to do that by opening an image tag, giving it a source with that headset image that we imported before. And then I want to give this image an alternative text. And this is basically what's going to be read out to your users who can't see, who rely on screen readers to navigate the web. So picture Oculus. Now we can see my page. We can see that this is definitely not what I wanted. My content is not next to each other. What gives? And I am also realizing that maybe I just need one single section. And this section needs to be an article with that form included in it. So let's rewrite some of our HTML just so that we can kind of keep it semantic. I personally feel a little bit bad about maybe I'm rewriting my HTML for the sake of layout, which is definitely not necessarily what I want to be in the business of doing. But currently we have this one section which holds all of this content. And because it's a block, this section takes up, let me give you a nice little visual. This currently takes up the entire width, right? If we look at this form, we just do that same style, background, green. We'll see that this is taking up its entire width. And actually the layout that I'm looking for is, I just want all of this content, so including the form, to be on the left side. And I want this image to be over here on the right side. So I'm going to rewrite this to remove this extraneous section. Am I removing the extraneous section or keeping them both, or creating a new one and putting them both in there? That might be it. So yeah, I'm going to open an article. I actually don't want to open an article because it's not super semantic. But I am going to put this form inside of my previous section. And then under this p tag, I'm going to drop my form. Then we just have that other section, which I can handle much more easily. Much easier. But I still need a container for both of these. So I am going to open an article. Didn't want to do this because there are area rules for an article that you want to be privy to. We'll cover them later. I know that our own Valerie will be doing a workshop on front end coming up on the 7th of April, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right, so now what I could do, I want to give my article a class so that I can, you know, if somebody says, hey, that's not very semantic, maybe use a div or something else, I just have to change that in here. I don't have to change any of my CSS, but I'm going to give this article a class name of container or content container. I've been developing websites and applications for about 9 years now, and I still find that naming is the hardest thing I do almost every day. So, you know, whenever you have to create a new class name, you're literally creating whatever it is. And, you know, this could be called my favorite kitchen. And as long as it's spelled well, or not, no, it could be spelled however you want it to be. As long as it, you know, doesn't have any spaces between it, that's a valid class name. My suggestion is I generally tend to follow is it a framework? I don't know if it's a framework. It's a naming convention. It's a naming convention. It's called BEM, block, which stands for Block Element Modifier. And what that basically helps me to do is imagine what all of my UI is going to actually be like. And give me just 1 second. The chat's going over there. Oh, thank you, Valerie, for keeping the chat updated. So basically, yeah, I think I could just kind of go through their example here. It lets me define what the main block is going to be. So in our case, it's going to be like content container. And then anything under that, we would actually just separate it with an underscore. So that, you know, maybe this section would be class name, content container, column. And even further, I could say, I don't want to make that a child, but I could say that, you know, if these titles, regardless of what element they're going to be, are going to, you know, it's just a title. So it's going to be content container title. Now, when I save that, I can very quickly come over here and say content container, and then content container title. And, you know, if I ever want to change my CSS or change my styles, I can get a very strong idea of where I'm going to be able to find that that group of styles, group of classes. But basically, I know that if I look at my element tree here, that inside this this, this content container, there are 2 sections. This other section should also get a class name. Content container. And I want both of these to be either like side to side. So what I can do now is I could say that content container is going to have a display of flex. And that's it, actually. That's all I have to do to have them side to side. Now, this isn't exactly what I wanted to look like, but it is definitely getting to where I wanted it to be in terms of layout. One of the things that I could do now is that because my content container columns are inside of this content container, well, there are a couple of rules that I can give this content container column that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, like if they weren't inside a flex container. That's all of these items rules. So you could give it an order. So let's say I wanted the content container column nth child number 2 to be first. That'll work. Don't know if that'll work. Maybe first child is better. I want to reverse the order of these elements. And I can very quickly do that because they accept this order rule that they would not have been able to accept if their parent wasn't a display flex. Now, because I removed it, the order is back to the same order it was because they are no longer, this order rule only works if it's a child of a display flex box. We could definitely talk about these other pseudo elements, these child elements. There's a lot of ways to target items that you are interested in. And there's a lot of different pseudo elements that exist in CSS. So I could say something like, let's say I had a list of, can I do odd like that or do I have to do odd like that? And I only wanted to target odd items, so I wanted to have like a striped list. I could use pseudo elements like that. We'll talk about those crazy pseudo elements later. For now, I know that I want my container to be a display flex, and I want each column to take up one unit, one same unit, and it's not doing that because this image is huge. So I'm going to give this image a class name too. I have content container main image. And I'm going to say that this image should take up 100% of its given space, of its container. And now this is looking a lot more or a lot closer to what I was interested in. I'm gonna do something different here real quick. I'm gonna look up my computer's color meter. Color meter, yeah. Please let me know if that shows up. It's basically telling me that this gray background on the image is different to RGB than 000. I think I can have it tell me. No, I don't think I can. It's 29, 30, 32 actually. So we are going to change our background to that. So this image looks like it belongs on our page. Well, wasn't it? It was 29, 30, 31, right? 29, 30, 31. Definitely not that one. think I would have to, let me see if my, yeah, this isn't working out for me too well. So let me actually use, if I still have it. Nope, I don't. Actually, there we go. Now, I was trying to do something weird because if you translate the RGBA or the RGB to the hex values, I actually don't need the A here. You're actually not starting, or you're starting at 0, but RGB values go up to 255 for each number, and hex values go up to F for each number. So yeah, there's a little bit of difference there. But now this image that we stole from Oculus.com fits in super nicely. Now there's a little bit more that I want to do to my page. Like this content is all, it's all up against the side of the page. No, I kind of want my content to be normal. Yeah, this is what anybody would see coming into my page. And I actually, I don't love this, the fact that there's so much, empty space here. So what if we could, at the very least, leave our header this way, but at the very least, we could kind of center our content to the rest of the page. Well, I'm just going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to say that this content container is going to have a height of 80 view height. And the reason I went with 80 is because 80 plus 20 equals 100. So for our content container here, it's basically telling it, hey, I need you to take up the rest of the space. So before this rule, if I use background magenta, you would see that we're only taking up this much space, but I'm going to say that our content container will require that width, 80 view height. Oh, height of 80 view height. Awesome. Now we can see that our container is taking up all of that space. And I'm going to use that rule I used earlier. I'm going to say that, all right, well, you should also align these items to the center. Now, I don't love this too much either, but it's definitely starting to get a little bit nicer. At least it's centered, so our content is a little bit it framed a little bit better. When our page grows, this kind of grows way out of proportion. So I'm going to show you my favorite little responsive trick without using any media queries. What I am going to say is that this content container, regardless of, is it the content container? Yeah, the content container will have a max width of, let's call it 1,000 pixels. Now, after our page grows to a certain width, our content is still kind of anchored there. We don't necessarily want that. So instead, I am going to give this some of those funky rules I was talking about earlier in terms of censoring things with CSS. Did that work? That might not have worked. Oh, maybe it did though. It does. There we go. So now when our content grows, it just kind of grows and grows and grows. But it doesn't ever get like too dicey. But I just lied to you because I just shrunk this a whole bunch. And what gives? What gives? So this looks starting to look ugly, right? So I kind of actually want to say that, all right, well, when it reaches mobile sizes, I kind of want you to switch the order up a little bit. And actually, before even that, I want this content container to have a padding left of about 40 pixels. And if you're wondering where these numbers have come from, like the 40 pixels, or did I use padding before? I did, but it's all gone. Anytime that I have to hard code numbers in, I have found that to make my life easier, a very simple and easy framework to follow is just a multiple of 8, right? That's a very good kind of grid unit to follow, to just kind of figure out how much padding you want to give to a thing, and then keep things uniform across your pages, which is super useful. So now we have a little bit of padding, so our content doesn't really ever touch the page, but you know, it's still starting to look really ugly when it gets to that kind of small. So I have the inspector open, which is kind of useful for this, because when I shrink my page, I could see in the top right corner that it's kind of telling me, all right, what's the current width of the viewport. So I know that at around, let's call it 940, my page starts looking all not how I want it to look. So I'm going to use one of those nifty media rules we talked about way earlier. I'm going to say that if the media is a screen, the screen only screen, and the max width of the page is 940. Then I want you to apply this special rule to content container that is going to be flex direction to equal column. And actually, I'm going to go with column reverse, because I want you to reverse the order of those items so that this little Oculus guy is at the very top. And maybe I should also apply, maybe let me bring this rule down here, because it's gonna impact many of my rules. And I'm also going to say that this content container main image, want the max height to be 30. So only take up, oh, that's not great. There we go. So now our Oculus image is only taking up 30%. And this is only when the page is smaller than that 900 pixels. Now, let's get to editing our content a little bit more. Let's go into some of the text-based rules that are super awesome and useful. And for my title, I want, because I removed that margin from all of my items, I want to give my title a line height of at least 2, so it reads a little bit better. And I actually want to give any of my paragraphs, which I will give a class name of content container paragraph. Again, the reason I'm doing this is because if I ever want to, I don't know, change it from a P to a span, I could just go and change this P to a span, and I don't have to change my CSS at all. Our form, I wanted to give this a class name of form container. So I just want to name it form. Then this is going to be a form label. Form email input and submit button. I kind of want to preface this form. Now that I've basically written out all of this, the rules that I need, I want to apply a similar rule to my paragraphs. Except I don't want it to be a line height of 2. I want it to be like 1.4. And these numbers truly come from my background as a graphic designer, kind of understanding typography, colors, all of those kind of rules. And you know, I don't necessarily expect that you would kind of out of the gate be able to understand like what is a good looking line height. And to that, I would say to try to look at other websites and have really nice typography, and I think that those are really great places to kind of learn. Really quick, I don't want this align center anymore because it looks ugly. Oh wait, no, that one I needed. I don't want my navigation to be aligned centered that way. I did want a nice padding to match my earlier padding. You know, if I make this less crazy like that, I make this a 90, and I only give it a padding of left, and that's basically what I need. There we go. The reason I'm doing that is because I know that when somebody looks at a web page, their eyes start up here. They always go from left to top left to bottom right. So generally, that's kind of, it catches, the first thing your eye is going to see is this, then your eyes are going to go to this image, then they're going to go to this content. Maybe they might not even go to that content. Again, I know this from just reading Nielsen a lot and kind of, you know, staying up to date with web design trends. But again, like one of the really cool things about CSS, about web design, is that there are so many different resources to kind of give you really beautiful reusable layouts. There's Bootstrap, there's Foundation, there's a whole slew of other ones that I'm blanking on. I really like Ant Design. I'll make sure I send y'all a couple of these after the talk or after I finish. But now all I really wanted to do was kind of style this this little form element, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go with form, just to make sure I'm targeting it. I am display flex inline. Is it inline flex? Give this a padding of 16. And again, there's that number that is just divisible by 8. I want to give it a little bit of space between it and the content above it. So I want to give it a margin top of 16. There's that uniformity again. And actually, those two paragraphs need to be separated. So I'm going to teach you something that you could do. Content container paragraph of container paragraph padding top 16. This is a different way to kind of target this sibling. It's actually telling you the specificity of it, which is nice. And it's only going to target any content container paragraph that is a sibling of a content container paragraph. So it's not targeting this one, but it is targeting this one. You can tell if I do like a background yellow. We're only targeting this second one. And if there were a third or fourth or a fifth, it would also do that. We could have also done that with a not selector, but again, I'm running out of time here. I kind of want to finish and make this not hideous. So I want to make this background actually white. I want to make the color of all of these elements not quite black. I think one of the things that we did that I've just learned is you never go to the extremes. You always go like close to the extremes. But all of this kind of stuff gets really Bob Rossy. So I want to give this a border radius. I'm going to give it 8 pixels, even though it might be too much. Nope, that is fine. Now I want it to tackle this label, make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go with that. It's only 5. And the last one is submit. My form input, I actually wanted to give it a height of around 54 pixels. And the reason I do that, oh, that is way too big, is on mobile, that's around the height that's recommended, I guess 40. Maybe just 28. It's fine for this, for these purposes right now. Also want it to have a padding of 8 pixels, a font. Okay, maybe I don't need the height on it. Do need a font size on it, 16. A border radius of half of our parent border radius. That made it look all weird, so I actually want it to have a border style that is solid. Nice, but I also need you to have a border color that is way chiller than that. Let's maybe make you a nice 6. Lighter than that. Let's make it an 8. There we go. Nice. Now, you see how my label and my button are all kind of out of whack? First, I kind of wanted to do something with the margins. I kind of wanted to do a margin right and left, at least 8 pixels. Too little, or just right. So what we can actually do is, because our display for this form is inline flex, I could just say align my items to the center. There we go. But because my submit button, which I actually need to pass an appearance of none. Does that work? Yep. An appearance of none. What I could do is I could say align yourself to stretch. Let's see if that'll work. And it does. So that its height is just going to be whatever the height of its container is. Now that I can do that, I'm just going to give this button a couple more styles. Background of this to be that same background color, because I'm thinking that's a good idea right now. That was a joke on myself. I need the color to be different. I need the color to actually be a nice white. And I also want it to be a bolder font weight. Now, maybe give it some border radius as well. Let's match that 4, which you have. Want your border style to be none. And now I want your padding to be a little beefed up. A little more beefed up, but only horizontally. And like last kind of little thing I wanted to do today, which I already did earlier, is give this a nice transition. RGB that is lighter, so that would be maybe like a 39, 40, 41. And I want to say that on that transition, on the element itself, on that transition, want the background have an easing of just a default ease and take up 180 milliseconds, so that instead of that very drastic kind of, I'm just changing the color right away, we're getting just a nice transition. I don't know if that comes through the webcast. We could also do this to this email, so that instead of getting that default purple, we're getting something different. So I could say in our form email input on focus, we'll have a border color of, let's call it purple. Make it more defined. Am I doing anything else? I'm taking away the outline, just that thing that it has on by default. And now when I focus on my element, I could see that I have that nice little purple color. No, we didn't style this other page, but maybe that's an exercise for the reader. I have definitely gone over what I was thinking I was going to go over, but I definitely kind of, at this point, would love to open it up for questions or kind of go into any of the specifics that you might be confused about. But yeah, I hope that y'all kind of got a nice little idea of kind of why the web pages that we go to look the way that they do, and how to start targeting all of those different things, and how to create a page that might be a little better suited to kind of what you're doing. But yeah, please, let's open it up to anyone and everybody who wants to ask anything. I don't see any hands. Valerie, you're unmuted.
I was just going to remind everyone that if they have any questions, that they would just need to make sure that they unmute so we can hear them.
Just checking out your page, and I think you need to contact your ISP provider. Yeah, I think the other thing that I kind of wanted to use to get the RGBA 39. So what I use to do that is just just understanding that I wanted it to be 10 units lighter. So lighter than this background. So I'm answering Erica's question. Yeah. On the button, right, where the default background is RGB 29, 30, 31, right? And I just know that if I want it to be 10 units lighter, then I would have to uniformly increase the values of each of those colors. So I need the red to be 10 units higher, the green to be 10 units higher, and the blue to be 10 units higher, which is how I got to that 39, 40, 41. We could go a little bit higher than that too, just make that change drastic. It's a word. All words are made up. And now when I hover, that's like a much more drastic. Also, I wanted to do something on that button because the cursor should be a pointer. That's a new rule. cursor, pointer. And now when I hover over my button, I'm gonna get that little thing on my mouse that I recognize as a thing that I can click. So 2 things that I'll say about this page, Steam Clown. One, your page is probably, oh, I think Safari has let me down, not you. Because whenever I see pages like this, I like to think that these are the most responsive pages. Or maybe my web browsers are bringing me down. I don't know. Yeah, you know, whenever we start adding lots of stuff to our web pages, we have to start thinking of like, how does my web page look on an iPad, on an iPhone, on a device, right? And a lot of the times, like the original web page that we came up for this was, you know, super responsive. It works the same in all devices. It loads, you know, it loads just the same way. Yeah, I think that's a little bonus. I wanted to push this up. Just a yarn build. Yeah, do we have any other questions on CSS? Maybe animations. One of the things that I definitely like didn't have too much time, and if y'all are interested in this, I love working with animations. But like the stuff that I kind of did for all of my website, I think is really kind of where the magic lives in the web. Being able to make content kind of react to just the average use cases that you see is kind of one of the secrets of making a page a little bit more interactive, more, you know, call to actions, or call to action, and all that kind of stuff. And let me deploy this. Only hosting. Oh, sorry. Yarn Firebase deploy only hosting. And I have a question here from Herrero, who has a really, really important question on, you know, how would I go about, here's my page in the wild web, and throw that in the chat. How would I go about managing all of the files, right? So if I go over here to my project, close this. So my directory structure is currently very, very flat, right? And basically all of my styles live inside this app.css file. And that's kind of fine because, you know, in terms of components, I only have this app.js file, and then this header, and then this thank you page. And if I'm to say that I will scale my CSS so that, you know, for every component, I'll have an equivalent CSS file. I kind of that would work really well because you would know exactly where to go to kind of update the styles of each page, and it would save us from the atrocity that I committed, which is, you know, I use this class name as navigation, but, you know, if you don't know that you have to go to app.css to get to the styles for this navigation, well then, you know, it's gonna take you longer to kind of find where things will be. So one of the ways that I structure my folders, that a lot of different methodologies of organizing your files kind of follow, is to have a components directory inside your source. And then in that component, for every different component you'll have a folder for that. So in this case, it would be like header. And then inside that header, I would have that initial header component, right? So I would just basically move this file in here. And then what I could additionally have is this let's make a header. this header CSS that I'm actually going to refactor my application to yank this from application. Did I? Nope. I'm going to cut this navigation, save that, drop it into header.css. From header.js, I'm going to import that file. I am actually going to copy the rest of this file. And I'm going to create a new file here called index.js. And all this index.js is it's going to export header as default from header. Actually, I don't have to do that. I can just do default. Header is just exporting its own default, and what the purpose of this index file is so that when I go to my app.css, I should delete this file. My page is probably not running anymore. Or it can't run because it doesn't, I deleted a file that it needed. But now in my app.js, instead of importing header from header, I'll import it from components header. And I don't have to further define that I need the header because that index file will handle that for me. And now I need to reboot my entire development server because the development server still doesn't really like it when you change files. Can't resolve header in SRC. Pero ¿por qué no? Oh, there we go. Another really great thing about using Create React App, it's gonna keep your stuff safe. And now I'm gonna keep it. Yeah, it keeps my header styles between page renders because the header is still following its own styles, which is awesome. But now this is exactly how I would organize my application structure. I mean, it's inside my source. I'll generally have different directories. I might have directories for things like my state. Like once you move from like having a single application to, I don't know, an application with hundreds to thousands of components that all need to talk to each other, then you have to like figure out a way to have a state or reducers that kind of keep them working together. That's a higher level conversations that we could definitely also have. But yeah, I hope, Coretta, I hope that that gives you a little bit of an idea, kind of how to structure your files. So, does anybody else have any questions? Oh, so the ball rolling effect on my page. So Victoria asks, what did I use to make this little effect on my page? I would say that it was years and years of CSS experience, but not really. If I look at I just inspect this code. What's happening here? What's happening? I created this div element for the ball, for the actual ball. The div has a pseudo element that's an after that actually has actually contains the the ball that you see. And then this whole fake container is like content above and below this section that kind of grows or grows out. So in terms of what I used, there's a couple of different things. It's a lot of CSS, some JavaScript and interactivity, so that when the page reaches a certain scroll position, execute this. And what gets executed is basically a transition. So I need to skew the container. And by skewing, it's just, you know, the container originally is like a box. If I skew it, it basically does this kind of effect to it. And then basically whenever you reach that point, the skew is inverted. So instead of -3, it goes to a 3. And at the same time, I tell this ball container all right, I need to go all the way to the left. So boom. And I think I could probably bring up that code on my computer. I don't know if any of these are yet. Yeah, this is my personal website. If you look at app, this is actually how my my directory structure for my personal website is handled. So I have this component. Inside this component, I have all of these different things. That specific thing we're talking about is in the about. Go to the about here. Here I have those that span with the fake container and the span with the ball. If I go into my styles, there's a JavaScript file, but it's using styled components, which is something I was kind of gonna show in this one, but we'll get to this kind of stuff later. You can see that actually, am I doing anything with the ball here? No. All happening in animations. And here's that anime.js library that I love. I'll drop this in the video description. This is one of my favorite JavaScript libraries. I think I basically you have to give me a reason not to add it to any projects that I work on. But it basically lets you have like a really, really strong, well-defined animation. So this is the actual animation that is handling this effect that you see here. So if we go through the entire life cycle, I created this hook called use scroll position. All you need to know is that it tells you what the scroll position is. And then in these use effects, if the scroll position is true, and then I basically tell it whether or not my animation should play. When it does play, it basically is just set has played, clean up scroll. Where is my animation getting? Oh yeah, use animation here. And my use animation thing will go off, and then my use animation is just literally take this element called fake container and skew it from 3 degrees to -3 degrees. That should last 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds. Also to that, add that this target.ball should translate the x, this is just a transform property. You should translate the x to -100% of itself. This should last 200 milliseconds, and you should give this an easing quad. There are way too many easings to keep list of easings. really nice. Yeah, easings.net. These are all the different kind of easings. It's just basically like, you know, you could have a linear easing and then something would happen just linearly, right? Or you could have this effect of easing in so that it's very fast at the beginning, and then before it ends, it goes a little bit slower. Again, these are kind of just all of the different things we could use for easings. But yeah, you should also do that relative to the first element by -600. So this starts this starts at 400 milliseconds after this. And this content container, which is actually the letter or this letter thing, this comes out after or with this thing. Because this has 200 and this is -200 relative to the first one. And there we go. The other super cool thing that we could talk about. My computer just died. Hello? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Hello? Still good? Yeah, should be good. The other really cool thing that we could talk about later is how CSS also responds to your system settings in terms of light or dark. And a lot of pages still don't do this. But you know, now that we all have, like, on our iPhones or whatever it is, you know, we could choose dark mode or light mode. I do think that our CSS should also respect what I've selected. So if my system is light, then my web page loads in this light way. Like, let's check Google. Google also loads in this light way. And then if I made my system appearance, like on iOS, I would have to change my settings. If I made them dark, my page goes dark, loads dark. If I go to Google, Google doesn't care about my settings. That's sad. But, you know, I'm sure they will at some point. It takes a really long time for Google to update things. There's a lot of people. But yeah, does anybody else have any other questions here before we wrap up? All right. Well, I'll make sure that I add the media queries for appearance, which I believe is just like it's literally just appearance, like a media query for appearance, something. So global. Yeah, it's this media query. So the same way that we had that media query that handled whether or not you know, do this when the screen is a certain size, you could say do this if the system is dark or if the system is light. In my case, I've created these global styles, these global variables for a thing that we didn't get a chance to cover today. And I'm just saying that, all right, when the system is dark, then I need you to just swap out these two variables. And that's basically all I had to do to make my website respond to the change. Super cool stuff. Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate y'all taking your time to look at somebody code in CSS. And if y'all have any other questions, I'll be available in the Tech by Choice Slack. So join that if you haven't yet. And this video will be up a little bit later if you want to kind of follow along and you know, your own pace and learn however you learn best. But for now, it has been a pleasure running this, and I hope that y'all come back for our next series, which I believe again is April 7th.
and Valerie will be covering front end.
No,
Other-
we have one on April 1st that we haven't announced
Oh.
yet, which is Intro to Product Design. So
Oh, love it.
design an app in under an hour.
Nice.
So we're going to make the announcement tonight for that. And then,
Yeah, you
yes,
heard it
April
here
7th
first.
is JavaScript 101.
Awesome. Love that. So you're going to be able to take the information that you learn in the next one and apply it to this one, which will be super cool. But yeah, definitely stick around for that one. And yeah, y'all stay safe. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.